In the tranquil village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless book vanishes from a locked case in Sir Henry Ashford's grand library, sparking a mystery that only Miss Jane Marple can unravel. Was it the nervous librarian, the charming guest, the ambitious dealer, or the secretive scholar? With whispers of midnight strolls, shady deals, and burned papers, Marple weaves through clues, a silk thread, a scuff mark, a hidden key, to unmask a cunning thief driven by greed. Dive into a tale of deception and deduction, where every secret leads to a shocking truth. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Volume. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the ancient elms that lined the winding lanes of the village. At the heart of this tranquil hamlet stood Ashford Hall, the imposing estate of Sir Henry Ashford, a man whose wealth was matched only by his passion for rare books. The hall's library, a sanctuary of polished oak shelves and leather-bound tomes, was whispered about in scholarly circles as a trove of literary treasures. On this particular morning, however, the peace of Ashford Hall was shattered by a discovery that set tongues wagging from the vicarage to the village shop. Sir Henry, a lean figure with a shock of white hair and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles, stood before a glass-fronted case in the library, his face ashen. The case, which had housed his most prized possession, a first-edition Historia Naturalis by Pliny the Elder, printed in Venice in 1469, was empty. The book, its vellum pages adorned with hand-illuminated initials, was gone, leaving only a faint indentation in the velvet lining where it had rested. Sir Henry's hands trembled as he touched the unblemished lock, its key still safely in his possession. "It's impossible," he muttered, his voice a mix of disbelief and dread. "Simply impossible." Word of the theft spread swiftly, as village news always did, and by noon Miss Jane Marple had been summoned. She arrived at Ashford Hall with her usual unassuming air, a small figure in a tweed skirt and cardigan, her white hair neatly pinned beneath a sensible hat. Her knitting bag swung lightly at her side, the faint click of needles betraying her constant occupation. Sir Henry greeted her in the drawing-room, his agitation evident as he paced before a roaring fire. "Miss Marple," he said, grasping her hand, "you've a knack for these things. The police will be here soon, but I trust your judgment. This is no ordinary theft." Miss Marple settled into a chintz-covered armchair, her pale blue eyes taking in the room's grandeur, the heavy velvet curtains, the portrait's stern Ashford ancestors, the faint scent of old leather and beeswax. "Tell me everything, Sir Henry," she said, her voice calm yet insistent, like a teacher coaxing a reluctant pupil. "Every detail matters." Sir Henry recounted the morning's events. He had entered the library at 9, as was his custom, to admire his collection before breakfast. The Historia Naturalis, valued not only for its rarity, but for its pristine condition, had been secure when he last checked it 2 evenings prior. The library's only visitors in the interim were 4 individuals, each with access to the room, but, he insisted, no reason to steal. "There's Mr. Grayson, my librarian," he began, "a fastidious fellow, been with me for years. Then Lady Clara Wentworth, a guest staying for the week, charming woman, but not bookish. Mr. Percival Drake, a book dealer from London, came to appraise some volumes. And Dr. Evelyn Hart, a scholar studying medieval texts. That's all. No one else could have entered." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers absently tracing the handle of her knitting bag. "And the case was locked, you say? No signs of tampering?" Sir Henry confirmed this, showing her the key, a heavy brass affair kept in his study. The library's windows, high and narrow, were latched, and the room's only door showed no evidence of forced entry. "It's as if the book vanished into thin air," he said, sinking into a chair. Miss Marple rose and requested to see the library. They crossed the hall, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor, and entered the cavernous room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of shelves laden with books, their spines gleaming in shades of burgundy and gold. The glass case stood at the room's center, its emptiness a stark contrast to the surrounding opulence. Miss Marple peered at the lock, her eyes narrowing as she noted its pristine condition. She glanced at the windows, observing a faint draft stirring the curtains, and made a mental note of the room's layout. Its high ceiling, the ladder leaning against a shelf, the faint dust on the floor, undisturbed except for a few footprints near the case. "Curious," she murmured, almost to herself. "A locked case, a missing book, and 4 people with access. It reminds me of old Mrs. Hargreaves's lost brooch. Everyone swore they hadn't touched it, but the truth was in the details." Sir Henry looked puzzled, but Miss Marple offered no explanation, only a serene smile. "I shall need to speak with each of them," she said. "People, you see, are like books themselves, full of stories if you know how to read them." As Sir Henry escorted her back to the drawing room, Miss Marple's mind was already at work, sifting through the fragments of the morning's tale. A rare book, a locked case, and 4 suspects, each with their own secrets. In St. Mary Mead, she knew, even the quietest souls could harbor surprising motives. With her knitting needles poised and her keen eye for human nature, Miss Marple prepared to unravel the mystery of the vanishing volume. Chapter 2. The Librarian's Tale. The late morning sun had climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, casting dappled shadows through the mullioned windows of Ashford Hall's parlor. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting needles resting in her lap, their faint metallic click punctuating the quiet as she waited for Mr. Grayson, the librarian. The room, with its faded Persian rug and mahogany sideboard, exuded a genteel calm, but Miss Marple's mind was far from tranquil. The disappearance of the Historia Naturalis was no mere theft. It was a puzzle, and she knew from long experience that the smallest details, a glance, a hesitation, a misplaced word, could unlock the truth. She had seen it before in the village, with Mrs. Eldridge's missing silver teapot, when a servant's nervous cough had led her to the culprit. People, she mused, were predictable in their unpredictability. Sir Henry Ashford, still shaken from the morning's discovery, hovered near the fireplace, his fingers fidgeting with a pocket watch. "Mr. Grayson is a good man, Miss Marple," he said, as if to reassure himself. "He's been with me for nearly a decade, tending the library like it's his own. Surely he couldn't—" His voice trailed off, and Miss Marple gave a gentle nod, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp as they caught the flicker of doubt in his face. The door creaked open, and Mr. Arthur Grayson entered, a slight man in his early 50s with a stooped posture and a face etched with lines of quiet dedication. His gray suit was immaculate, though the cuffs showed faint signs of wear, and his spectacles, perched low on his nose, magnified his pale, anxious eyes. He carried a leather-bound notebook, its edges frayed, and clutched it as if it were a shield. "You wish to see me, Sir Henry?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with unease. His gaze darted to Miss Marple, and she noted the quick tightening of his lips. "Indeed, Mr. Grayson," said Miss Marple, her tone mild, like a kindly aunt inviting a guest to tea. "Please, do sit down. I'm helping Sir Henry with this unfortunate matter of the missing book, and I'd like to hear your account. You were in the library yesterday, I understand?" Grayson sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, his notebook resting on his knees. "Yes, ma'am," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "I was there all day, cataloging new acquisitions and checking the condition of the older volumes. The Historia Naturalis was in its case when I left at 8 o'clock last evening. I locked it myself, as always." His words were precise, delivered with the care of a man accustomed to order, but Miss Marple caught a faint tremor in his hands as he spoke. She leaned forward slightly, her knitting untouched but her attention unwavering. "And you saw nothing unusual? No visitors? No disturbances?" Her voice was gentle, but there was a probing quality to it, like a needle slipping through fabric to find a hidden seam. Grayson hesitated, his fingers tightening on the notebook. "No, ma'am. The library was quiet. Sir Henry was in London until late, and the others, Lady Clara, Mr. Drake, and Dr. Hart, came and went, but they didn't linger. I was alone most of the time." He paused, then added, "I take my duties seriously. That book? It's irreplaceable. I'd never let harm come to it." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the ink stains that darkened his fingertips, a detail she'd noticed earlier, but now seemed more significant. "Of course," she said soothingly. "You've been with Sir Henry for many years, haven't you? Such loyalty is commendable. But tell me, Mr. Grayson, do you always lock the case yourself, or does Sir Henry ever do it?" Grayson's eyes flickered, and he adjusted his spectacles again, a nervous tick Miss Marple filed away. "I always lock it," he said firmly. "Sir Henry trusts me with the key when he's away. He keeps his own in his study, but I use the duplicate. It's kept in a locked drawer in the library desk, and I'm the only one with access to that." "A duplicate key," Miss Marple murmured, almost to herself, her mind turning over the possibilities. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, when young Tommy Pierce had made a copy of the church key to sneak in and pilfer the poor box. Duplicate keys, she knew, were a thief's delight. "And you're certain the case was secure when you left? No one could have opened it after you?" "Quite certain," Grayson said, his voice rising slightly. "I checked the lock twice before leaving, and I'd know if anyone tampered with it. The mechanism is delicate. Any force would leave marks, and there were none." He opened his notebook as if to prove his diligence, revealing pages filled with meticulous records of the library's contents, dates, and conditions. "See here," he said, pointing to a line dated the previous evening. "I noted the Historia Naturalis at 8 o'clock. All was in order." Miss Marple leaned forward to glance at the page, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. The entry was indeed there, but something about the ink caught her attention. It seemed fresher than the surrounding notes, as if written in haste or added later. She made no comment, only smiled and said, "How thorough you are, Mr. Grayson. It must be a comfort to Sir Henry to have such a diligent librarian." Grayson flushed slightly, his shoulders relaxing a fraction. "I do my best, ma'am," he said. "The library is my life's work. I couldn't bear to think I'd failed in my duty." Sir Henry, who had been listening silently, interjected, "Grayson's never given me cause for doubt, Miss Marple. He's as honest as the day is long." But his voice carried a note of strain, and Miss Marple wondered if he was trying to convince himself as much as her. She turned back to Grayson, her expression kindly, but her questions precise. "Tell me about the others who visited the library yesterday. Lady Clara, for instance. What was she doing there?" Grayson shifted in his seat, his fingers brushing the notebook's edge. "Lady Clara came in the afternoon, around 3. She said she wanted to see the collection. Something about appreciating history, though she didn't seem particularly interested. She wandered about, touched a few books, and left after 10 minutes. I don't think she even looked at the Historia Naturalis." "And Mr. Drake?" Miss Marple prompted, her tone unchanged but her eyes alert. Grayson's lips tightened again. "Mr. Drake was here in the morning, about 11. He's a book dealer, as you know, and Sir Henry asked him to appraise some volumes for a possible sale. He spent a good hour examining the shelves, especially the rare books. He asked about the Historia Naturalis, said it was a marvel, worth a king's ransom. I didn't like his tone, truth be told. Too eager." He glanced at Sir Henry, as if seeking approval for his candor. Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the hint of dislike in Grayson's voice. "And Dr. Hart?" "She was here most of the day," Grayson said, his tone softening. "She's studying medieval manuscripts for her research. She worked at the table near the window, taking notes from some of the older texts. She's careful, respectful of the books. I checked on her a few times, but she was absorbed in her work. She left just before I locked up." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "And you saw nothing out of the ordinary? No one lingering near the case? No unusual noises?" Grayson shook his head firmly. "Nothing, ma'am. The library was as quiet as a church. I'd have noticed anything amiss." Miss Marple leaned back, her fingers brushing the knitting bag as if seeking comfort in its familiarity. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said. "You've been most helpful. I may need to speak with you again, but for now, that will do." Grayson rose, clutching his notebook, and gave a small bow before retreating. Sir Henry watched him go, then turned to Miss Marple. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice low. "He's a good man, isn't he?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her reply was measured. "He seems devoted to his work, Sir Henry, but devotion can take many forms, you know. I once knew a gardener in St. Mary Mead who loved his roses so much he hid one in his shed to keep it from being picked. People can surprise you." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "I'd like to see the library again, if I may, and then I'll speak with Lady Clara." Sir Henry led her back to the library, where the empty case stood like a silent accusation. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes sweeping the room with the precision of a hawk. She paused by the desk where Grayson kept his duplicate key, noting the locked drawer and the faint scratches around its keyhole, barely visible but suggestive. She examined the floor, where a thin layer of dust showed only Grayson's footprints near the case, though they seemed oddly concentrated, as if he'd stood there longer than necessary. The high windows, still ajar, caught her attention again, and she stepped closer, running a finger along the sill. A faint smudge of dirt, perhaps from a shoe, marked the wood, but it was too faint to be certain. As she turned back to the case, Miss Marple's mind was already weaving a pattern from the threads of Grayson's tale. His diligence, his nervousness, the ink stains, the fresh entry in his notebook. They were all pieces of a puzzle, though not yet complete. She thought of the village postman, Mr. Jenkins, who'd once sworn he'd delivered a letter that never arrived, only for it to turn up in his own bag. People, she knew, could be blind to their own actions, or clever at hiding them. "Sir Henry," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'll need to know more about this duplicate key. And perhaps you could tell me, does Mr. Grayson ever leave the estate? Does he have friends, interests outside the library?" Sir Henry frowned, puzzled. "He's a private man, lives in a cottage on the grounds, rarely goes out. His whole world is the library. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes distant. "Just a thought," she said. "Sometimes, you see, the quietest people have the most to say, if you listen closely." As they left the library, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Lady Clara, whose charm and late-night strolls hinted at a story of their own. The Historia Naturalis was more than a book. It was a magnet for hidden desires, and Miss Marple was determined to find whose had pulled it from its case. Chapter 3. The Guest's Charm. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Ashford Hall's morning room, casting delicate patterns across the polished mahogany table where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting bag at her side. The air carried the faint scent of lavender polish, mingling with the sharper aroma of the tea that a maid had just poured. Miss Marple sipped her cup, her pale blue eyes thoughtful, as she awaited Lady Clara Wentworth, the next thread in the tapestry of the missing Historia Naturalis. She had learned long ago, in the quiet corners of St. Mary Mead, that charm could be as concealing as a fog, and Lady Clara's reputation for it preceded her like a well-rehearsed overture. Sir Henry Ashford, still restless, stood by the window, peering out at the manicured lawns as if they might yield answers. "Lady Clara's a delightful guest," he said, turning to Miss Marple. "She's been staying here a week, visiting from London. Her father was a friend of mine, old Lord Wentworth, fine family, but she's not the sort to bother with dusty old books, is she?" His tone held a question, as if seeking reassurance, and Miss Marple noted the faint crease in his brow. "People can surprise one, Sir Henry," she replied, her voice soft but carrying that gentle insistence that invited no argument. "I recall Mrs. Bantry's cousin, who seemed all fluff and no substance, yet she knew every plant in her garden by its Latin name. Appearances, you see, are only the cover of the book." She set her teacup down, her fingers brushing the handle of her knitting bag, a gesture as natural to her as breathing. The door swung open, and Lady Clara Wentworth entered with the grace of a dancer, her silk dress, a soft shade of emerald, rustling as she moved. She was a woman in her early 30s, with auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon and eyes that sparkled with a calculated warmth. Her smile, bright and effortless, seemed to fill the room, and Miss Marple felt the subtle shift in the air, as if a performance had begun. "Sir Henry, how dreadful this business is," Lady Clara exclaimed, her voice a melodic blend of sympathy and surprise. "And you must be, Miss Marple. I've heard you're quite clever at sorting these things out." She sank into a chair, her movements fluid, and fixed Miss Marple with a look of polite curiosity. Miss Marple returned the smile, her own expression serene, but her gaze sharp, like a needle poised to thread a difficult stitch. "I do my best, Lady Clara," she said. "It's a puzzling matter, this theft. Sir Henry tells me you visited the library yesterday. Perhaps you could share what you saw." Lady Clara's laugh was light, almost musical, as she waved a slender hand. "Oh, I'm afraid I'm not much use there. I only popped in to admire Sir Henry's collection. Such a marvelous room, all those old books. But I wouldn't know a rare manuscript from a cookbook. I was there in the afternoon just for a few minutes to pass the time. It's all rather grand, isn't it?" Her eyes flicked to Sir Henry, who nodded, clearly charmed, and Miss Marple noted the ease with which she deflected scrutiny. "Indeed, it is a fine library," Miss Marple said, her tone encouraging. "And you saw nothing out of the ordinary? Mr. Grayson was there, I presume?" Lady Clara tilted her head as if recalling the moment. "Yes, Mr. Grayson was fussing about with his lists, as usual. Such a serious man, always buried in his work. I didn't stay long. I find libraries a bit stuffy, don't you? I wandered about, looked at a few books on the shelves, and then went out to the garden. It was such a lovely day." Her smile widened, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting tightness in her expression, as if the memory held more than she let on. "And the Historia Naturalis?" Miss Marple asked, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "Did you notice it in its case?" Lady Clara's fingers brushed a pearl earring, a small gesture that Miss Marple filed away. "That old book everyone's talking about? I suppose it was there, but I didn't pay it any mind. It was in a glass case, wasn't it? I didn't go near it." Her tone was airy, but Miss Marple sensed a careful choice of words, as if Lady Clara were painting a picture just a shade too perfect. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "How interesting," she said. "You see, I find that people often notice more than they realize. A shadow, a sound, a glance. These things linger in the mind. Were there others in the library with you? Mr. Drake, perhaps? Or Dr. Hart?" Lady Clara's eyes flickered, and she smoothed her dress, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by a less observant eye. "No, just Mr. Grayson, as I said. I didn't see Mr. Drake. That book dealer, isn't he? Rather a sharp sort, I thought when I met him at dinner. And Dr. Hart was at a table by the window, scribbling away." She barely looked up. "Scholars are such odd creatures, don't you think?" She laughed again, but it sounded forced, like a note struck slightly off-key. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged, but her mind racing. She recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead, Miss Felicity, who had charmed everyone at the village fete while slipping a bracelet into her pocket. Charm, she knew, could be a mask, and Lady Clara's was polished to a shine. "And after the library," Miss Marple continued, "what did you do? I understand you enjoy the gardens here." "Oh, yes." Lady Clara's face brightened, as if relieved to change the subject. "I spent the rest of the afternoon sketching by the rose arbor. It's so peaceful, and the light was perfect. Later I took a walk around the estate. It's such a lovely place to wander at dusk." She paused, then added, "I suppose I was out until quite late. I do love a nighttime stroll." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "How pleasant," she said. "And you saw no one else during your walk? No one near the library, perhaps?" She thought of young Tommy's tale from the village, the baker's boy, who had whispered about seeing Lady Clara near the estate's gates at midnight, carrying a parcel. Gossip, of course, was often unreliable, but Miss Marple never dismissed it outright. Lady Clara shook her head, her auburn curls catching the light. "No one at all. The grounds were quiet, just the way I like them. I went back to my room afterward and slept like a dream." Her smile was radiant, but Miss Marple noted the slight quickening of her breath, as if the question had brushed too close to something hidden. Sir Henry, who had been listening quietly, interjected, "Lady Clara's been a perfect guest, Miss Marple. She's kept us all entertained with her stories of London. I can't imagine her involved in anything so sordid as theft." His tone was defensive, and Miss Marple wondered if Lady Clara's charm had worked its magic on him, as it likely had on others. "Quite so," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "But it's my habit to ask questions, Sir Henry, even of the most charming people. One never knows where a clue might hide." She turned back to Lady Clara. "You mentioned meeting Mr. Drake at dinner. Did he speak of the Historia Naturalis?" Lady Clara's fingers paused on her earring, then resumed their gentle motion. "Oh, he went on about it, didn't he? Said it was worth a fortune, the sort of thing collectors would fight over. I found it rather dull, to be honest, all that talk of old paper and ink. I prefer a good novel myself." She laughed, but Miss Marple sensed a careful sidestep, as if Lady Clara were steering the conversation away from dangerous ground. Miss Marple set her teacup down, the faint clink punctuating the silence. "Thank you, Lady Clara," she said. "You've been most helpful. I may need to trouble you again, but for now, I'll let you return to your sketching." Her smile was warm, but her eyes lingered on Lady Clara's face, searching for the flicker of unease she knew was there. Lady Clara rose, her movements as graceful as ever, and offered a parting smile. "Anything to help, Miss Marple. I do hope you find that book. It's caused such a fuss." She glided from the room, leaving behind a faint trace of jasmine perfume and a sense of something unspoken. Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of relief and curiosity. "She's quite something, isn't she? Do you think she knows more than she's saying?" Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her needles resuming their rhythmic click. "She's certainly charming, Sir Henry," she said, her tone thoughtful. "But charm, you know, is like a curtain. It can hide all sorts of things. I once knew a girl in St. Mary Mead, pretty as a picture, who smiled her way through a theft at the vicarage. We shall see." She paused, her eyes distant. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Drake next, if you please. His interest in the book seems pronounced." As Sir Henry nodded and went to summon the book dealer, Miss Marple's mind turned over Lady Clara's words, weighing them against the village gossip and the faint clues she'd gathered. The midnight stroll, the parcel, the quick deflection of questions about the library. They were all threads, and Miss Marple was adept at weaving them into a pattern. The Historia Naturalis was more than a stolen book. It was a mirror reflecting hidden desires, and Lady Clara's charm, she suspected, concealed a story yet to be told. Chapter 4. The Dealer's Ambition. The clock in Ashford Hall's morning room struck 3, its chimes resonating softly as Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles idle for the moment, her gaze fixed on the garden beyond. The roses, still vibrant despite the autumn chill, swayed in the breeze, and Miss Marple's thoughts mirrored their gentle motion, weaving through the clues she had gathered thus far. Lady Clara's polished charm and Mr. Grayson's nervous precision had each offered glimpses into the mystery of the missing Historia Naturalis, but neither had revealed the full picture. Now, as she awaited Mr. Percival Drake, the book dealer, Miss Marple sensed she was about to encounter a different sort of character, one whose ambitions, she suspected, might run deeper than the others. Sir Henry Ashford paced near the fireplace, his earlier agitation replaced by a weary resignation. "Drake's a sharp fellow," he said, glancing at Miss Marple. "Knows his books, no question. I invited him to appraise some lesser volumes for a potential sale, but he seemed awfully keen on the Historia Naturalis. Still, He's a professional. Surely he wouldn't stoop to theft." His words carried a note of hope, but Miss Marple detected a shadow of doubt, as if Sir Henry himself were not entirely convinced. "Professional men can have private troubles, Sir Henry," Miss Marple replied, her voice as soft as the rustle of leaves outside. "I recall Mr. Hodges, the bank clerk in St. Mary Mead, who seemed the soul of respectability until his gambling debts came to light. Ambition, you see, can twist even the most polished exterior." She adjusted her shawl, her eyes bright with anticipation. The door opened, and Mr. Percival Drake entered, his presence as commanding as it was calculated. He was a man in his early 40s, with slicked-back dark hair and a tailored suit that spoke of city sophistication rather than village simplicity. His eyes, sharp and assessing, swept the room before settling on Miss Marple, and his smile, though polite, had the practiced edge of a salesman. "Miss Marple, I presume?" he said, extending a hand adorned with a gold signet ring. "Sir Henry's told me of your reputation. A village sleuth, eh? Most intriguing." His tone was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the faintest hint of condescension, as if he thought her a quaint curiosity. She shook his hand, her grip gentle, but her gaze unwavering. "I'm merely an observer of human nature, Mr. Drake," she said, her smile serene. "And human nature, I find, is often at the heart of such mysteries as this. Please, sit down and tell me about your visit to the library yesterday." Drake settled into a chair, crossing one leg over the other with an air of confidence. "Happy to help," he said, his voice carrying the clipped efficiency of a man accustomed to closing deals. "I was here to appraise some of Sir Henry's books. Routine business, you understand. He's considering selling a few minor volumes to fund new acquisitions. I spent the morning in the library, examining the collection. Fine stuff, really. That Historia Naturalis, a gem, worth a fortune on the open market." His eyes gleamed briefly, and Miss Marple noted the flicker of enthusiasm, like a spark in dry grass. "A fortune, you say?" she prompted, her tone mild but her attention sharp. "And you examined it closely?" Drake nodded, leaning back with a casual air. "Oh, yes. I asked Mr. Grayson to open the case so I could take a proper look. It's in remarkable condition, vellum, hand-illuminated, first edition from 1469. A collector in Paris would pay upwards of £50,000, maybe more. But I assure you, I left it right where it was. Stealing's not my game, Miss Marple. My reputation's worth more than that." His smile was wide, but Miss Marple sensed a calculated edge, as if he were measuring her reaction. She tilted her head, her fingers brushing the edge of her knitting bag. "Your reputation, of course," she said. "A dealer in rare books must rely on trust. But tell me, Mr. Drake, did you spend much time with the Historia Naturalis? Or were you focused on the other volumes?" Drake's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so brief it might have gone unnoticed by a less observant eye. "I gave it a thorough once-over," he admitted. "Had to, for the appraisal. But I was more interested in some of the other books, lesser-known works, easier to move in the market. The Historia's too famous, you see. Selling it would raise too many questions." He spread his hands as if to emphasize his innocence, but Miss Marple noted the slight sheen of perspiration on his forehead, despite the coolness of the room. "And who else was in the library while you were there?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a lullaby but with a probing undertone. "Mr. Grayson, I presume?" "Yes, Grayson was there, fussing over his ledgers," Drake said, his tone carrying a hint of disdain. He's a bit of a stickler, isn't he? Kept hovering, making sure I didn't smudge the pages. Dr. Hart was there too, scribbling away at her table. Didn't say much, just nodded when I came in. And Lady Clara breezed through later, though she didn't stay long, seemed more interested in the room's decor than the books. He chuckled, but Miss Marple caught the way his eyes darted to the side, as if sifting through his own words for any misstep. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And you left the library when?" "Around noon," Drake said promptly. "I had lunch with Sir Henry, then spent the afternoon in my room going over my notes. I didn't go back to the library after that." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple's mind snagged on a detail from the village gossip. Mrs. Pemberley's account of seeing Drake near the inn, deep in conversation with a stranger about a valuable item. Noon was hours before that encounter, and Miss Marple wondered what had kept him abroad in the evening. "You're very precise, Mr. Drake," she said, her smile encouraging. "It must come with your trade, keeping track of details. Did you notice anything unusual in the library? The case, perhaps, or the room itself?" Drake shook his head, his confidence returning. "Nothing out of place. The case was locked when I left, and Grayson was still there, guarding it like a dragon. If anything happened to that book, it was after I was done." He leaned forward, his tone earnest. "Look, Miss Marple, I know how this looks. A dealer with debts, a valuable book gone, missing. But I'm no thief. I've built my business on integrity. Ask anyone in London." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "I'm sure you have, Mr. Drake," she said. "But debts, you know, can weigh heavily. I once knew a shopkeeper in St. Mary Mead, a most respectable man, who took to selling his neighbor's apples when the bank pressed him. Desperation can make even honest men bend." She paused, watching his reaction. Drake's jaw tightened, and for a moment his polished facade cracked, revealing a flash of irritation. "I don't know what you've heard, but my finances are my own business," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm here to do a job, not to steal from my client." He rose, smoothing his jacket. "If you'll excuse me, I have some correspondence to attend to." Miss Marple nodded, her smile unchanged. "Of course, Mr. Drake. Thank you for your time. I may need to speak with you again, but for now, you've been most illuminating." She watched as he left, his stride brisk but his shoulders tense, and she filed away the impression of a man who knew more than he cared to admit. Sir Henry turned to her, his brow furrowed. "He's a bit slick, isn't he? But he makes a fair point. Stealing something so well known would be risky for a man in his position." "Risky, yes," Miss Marple agreed, picking up her knitting and letting the needles resume their quiet rhythm. "But ambition, Sir Henry, is a powerful spur. And Mr. Drake, I think, is a man with ambitions that stretch beyond his means. I'd like to know more about this buyer in Paris he mentioned. And perhaps my nephew, Inspector West, could look into those debts of his." She paused, her eyes distant. "Next, I think, we should speak with Dr. Hart. Scholars, you know, can be as passionate as collectors, and passion can lead to curious actions." As Sir Henry went to fetch the scholar, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Drake's gleaming eyes, his quick defensiveness, and the village whisper of his late-night meeting. The Historia Naturalis was a prize that could tempt even the most cautious, and Mr. Drake, she suspected, was far from cautious. The threads of the mystery were tightening, and Miss Marple was ready to pull them taut. Chapter 5. The Scholar's Secrets. The late afternoon light slanted through the tall windows of Ashford Hall's morning room, casting long shadows across the parquet floor. Miss Jane Marple sat with her knitting untouched, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes bright with the quiet intensity of a mind piecing together a puzzle. The interviews with Mr. Grayson, Lady Clara, and Mr. Drake had each added threads to the mystery of the missing Historia Naturalis, but none had yet woven a complete pattern. Now, as she awaited Dr. Evelyn Hart, the scholar, Miss Marple felt a familiar stirring, an instinct honed by years of observing the subtle quirks of human nature in St. Mary, Mead. Scholars, she knew, could be as driven by passion as any collector or dealer, and passion, when unchecked, could lead to unexpected deeds. Sir Henry Ashford stood by the mantel, his earlier agitation now tempered by a weary curiosity. "Doctor, Hart's a serious sort," he said, glancing at Miss Marple. "She's been here a fortnight, studying my medieval manuscripts for some academic paper. Quiet, keeps to herself, but she knows her stuff. I can't see her mixed up in something like this." His voice carried a note of conviction, but Miss Marple noted the slight furrow in his brow, as if he were reassuring himself as much as her. "Knowledge is a powerful thing, Sir Henry," Miss Marple replied, her tone as gentle as the rustle of her shawl. "I once knew a curate in St. Mary Mead, a learned man, who took a silver candlestick from the church to study its inscriptions. He meant no harm, but his obsession blinded him to right and wrong. Scholars, you see, can lose themselves in their pursuits." She smiled faintly, her eyes distant, already anticipating the conversation ahead. The door opened, and Dr. Evelyn Hart entered, her presence a stark contrast to the polished charm of Lady Clara or the slick confidence of Mr. Drake. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a plain gray dress and hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face unadorned, but for a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles that magnified her intense, dark eyes. She carried a worn leather notebook, its pages bulging with loose papers, and her posture was rigid, as if braced for scrutiny. "Miss Marple?" she said, her voice low and precise, with a hint of wariness. "Sir Henry said you wished to speak with me about the theft. I'm not sure how I can help, but I'll do what I can." Miss Marple gestured to a chair, her smile warm but her gaze piercing. "Please, Dr. Hart, do sit down. I understand you've been working in the library, studying Sir Henry's manuscripts. The Historia Naturalis must have been of particular interest to you, given its historical significance." Dr. Hart sat, her notebook resting on her lap like a shield. "It's an extraordinary work," she said, her voice warming slightly with academic fervor. "Pliny's text is a cornerstone of natural history, and Sir Henry's copy, with its illuminated initials and pristine vellum, is a rarity. I've been studying it for my research on medieval scientific texts, comparing its annotations to later manuscripts. But I assure you, I had no part in its disappearance." Her words were firm, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened on the notebook, a faint tremor betraying her composure. "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "I'm merely trying to understand the library's comings and goings yesterday. You were there most of the day, I believe." Dr. Hart nodded, adjusting her spectacles. "Yes, from mid-morning until nearly 8, when Mr. Grayson locked up. I was at the table by the window, transcribing notes from a 13th century herbal and cross-referencing with the Historia Naturalis. It's slow work, but necessary." She opened her notebook, revealing pages filled with dense handwriting and detailed sketches of manuscript pages, including one that caught Miss Marple's eye. A precise rendering of the Historia Naturalis's title page, complete with its intricate border. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her eyes lingering on the sketch. "How meticulous you are," she said, her voice admiring. "Such drawings must take a great deal of time. Did you make this while the book was in its case?" Dr. Hart hesitated, her fingers pausing on the page. "No, I made it earlier in the week, when Sir Henry allowed me to examine the book closely. He opened the case for me a few days ago, under Mr. Grayson's supervision. I needed to study the binding and marginalia for my paper." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward Sir Henry, as if seeking confirmation. Sir Henry nodded. "That's right. I let Dr. Hart handle the book last week. She was very careful, and Grayson was there the whole time." He sounded reassuring, but Miss Marple noted the slight emphasis on careful, as if he felt the need to defend her. Miss Marple smiled, her expression unchanged but her mind alert. "And yesterday, you didn't need to see the book again. You worked only from your notes?" "Yes," Dr. Hart said quickly. "I had all I needed from my earlier study. I was focused on the herbal yesterday, though I glanced at the Historia. In its case, now and then. It was there when I left, I'm certain." She closed her notebook, as if to signal the end of the topic, but Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the worn leather cover, wondering what other secrets it held. "Very interesting," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as ever. "And who else was in the library with you? I understand Mr. Drake and Lady Clara were there at different times." Dr. Hart's lips pursed slightly, a flicker of disapproval crossing her face. "Mr. Drake was there in the morning, poking about the shelves. He seemed far too interested in the Historia Naturalis, asking Mr. Grayson all sorts of questions about its value. I found him rather crass. Lady Clara came in the afternoon, but she didn't stay long. She wandered about, touching the books as if they were mere decorations. I was too busy to pay much attention." Her voice carried a hint of disdain, and Miss Marple noted the scholar's evident contempt for those less devoted to the written word. "And Mr. Grayson?" Miss Marple prompted. "He was there throughout the day?" "Yes, he was in and out, checking his records and watching everyone like a hawk," Dr. Hart said, her tone softening. "He's very protective of the collection, which I respect. He locked the case before I left, and everything seemed in order." She paused, then added, "I can't imagine how the book was taken. It's such a loss to scholarship." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the window, where the fading light cast a soft glow on the room. "A loss indeed," she said. "But losses, you know, often reveal more than they conceal. I once knew a librarian in St. Mary Mead who misplaced a rare volume, only to find it had been borrowed by a colleague with a hidden agenda. People's passions can lead them astray." She paused, watching Dr. Hart's reaction. The scholar's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened on her notebook again, and Miss Marple caught a fleeting shadow in her eyes, as if the words had struck a nerve. "I've no agenda beyond my research," Dr. Hart said firmly. "My work is about preserving knowledge, not stealing it." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile unwavering. "But tell me, Doctor Hart, do you ever work late in the library, or perhaps take your notes elsewhere in the evening?" Dr. Hart's eyes narrowed slightly, and she adjusted her spectacles. "I worked until Mr. Grayson closed the library at 8, she said. After that, I returned to my room to organize my notes. I didn't go back to the library." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple sensed a careful choice of words, as if Dr. Hart were guarding something unsaid. Miss Marple leaned back, her hands folding over her knitting bag. "Thank you, Dr. Hart," she said. "You've been most helpful. I may need to speak with you again, but for now, I'll let you return to your studies." Her tone was kind, but her eyes lingered on the scholar's notebook, its bulging pages hinting at more than mere academic zeal. Dr. Hart rose, clutching her notebook, and gave a curt nod before leaving the room. Sir Henry watched her go, then turned to Miss Marple. "She's a bit intense, isn't she? But harmless, surely. All that talk of manuscripts and marginalia, it's her world." Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly as she resumed her work. "Perhaps," she said, her voice thoughtful. "But worlds, Sir Henry, can be small and consuming. I recall a schoolteacher in St. Mary Mead who hoarded books from the lending library, convinced she alone could protect them. Dr. Hart's passion is clear, but passion can blind as well as illuminate." She paused, her eyes distant. "I'd like to see the library again, if I may, before we move on. There's something about that table by the window that interests me." As Sir Henry nodded and led the way, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Dr. Hart's sketches, her guarded demeanor, and the faint tremor in her hands. The Historia Naturalis was a beacon for hidden desires, and Dr. Hart's secrets, she suspected, were woven into the pages of her notebook. The mystery was deepening, and Miss Marple was ready to unravel its next layer. Chapter 6. The Locked Case Conundrum. The evening shadows lengthened across the lawns of Ashford Hall, their edges softened by the golden haze of an autumn sunset. Inside, Miss Jane Marple stood in the library, her slight figure dwarfed by the towering oak shelves that loomed like silent sentinels. The room was hushed, save for the faint creak of floorboards under her careful steps and the distant tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. The empty glass case, once the proud home of the Historia Naturalis, stood at the room's center, its polished surface catching the last rays of light. To Miss Marple, it was not merely an empty case, but a challenge, a riddle wrapped in brass and glass, demanding her attention as keenly as any village scandal in St. Mary Mead. Sir Henry Ashford hovered nearby, his hands clasped behind his back, his face etched with a mixture of frustration and hope. "It's baffling, Miss Marple," he said, gesturing to the case. "The lock's untouched, the key's safe in my study, and Grayson's duplicate is in his desk. How could anyone have taken the book without leaving a mark?" His voice carried the weight of a man who saw his sanctuary violated, and Miss Marple noted the faint quiver in his tone, reminiscent of old Mr. Clements, whose prize roses had vanished from a locked greenhouse. She stepped closer to the case, her eyes tracing its contours with the precision of a seamstress examining a delicate stitch. "A locked case is a curious thing, Sir Henry," she said, her voice soft but laced with quiet authority. "It suggests either great cunning or great simplicity. I recall a case in St. Mary Mead when Mrs. Price's pearl necklace disappeared from a locked box. Everyone assumed a master thief, but it was only her nephew with a hairpin and a bit of patience." She smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the air as if to coax the truth from it. The case itself was a handsome piece, its brass fittings gleaming under the library's chandelier. The lock, a sturdy mechanism of Victorian design, showed no scratches or dents, no signs of force. Miss Marple peered through the glass, noting the velvet lining within, its faint indentation a ghostly outline of the missing book. She glanced at the keyhole, then at the hinges, her mind turning over possibilities. "You're certain only you and Mr. Grayson have keys?" she asked, turning to Sir Henry. He nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. My key never leaves my study. It's in a locked drawer, and I checked it this morning, still there. Grayson's key is kept in his desk, in a drawer he locks religiously. He showed it to me after we discovered the theft, safe and sound." His brow furrowed. "Could someone have made a copy, do you think?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "A copy, yes, that's always possible," she said. "Locksmiths can be persuaded, or keys can be borrowed briefly and returned unnoticed. I once knew a maid in St. Mary Mead who copied her mistress's key to sneak a look at forbidden letters. People are clever when they want to be." She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room, taking in the high windows, the heavy door, the ladder propped against a shelf. She moved to the desk where Mr. Grayson kept his duplicate key, a sturdy piece of furniture tucked in a corner. The locked drawer yielded to Sir Henry's master key, revealing a small brass key nestled in a velvet-lined box. Miss Marple examined it closely, noting its polished surface, free of wear or tampering. "No scratches here either," she murmured, almost to herself. But a key need not be scratched to be used. She closed the drawer, her mind lingering on Grayson's nervous demeanor and the fresh ink in his notebook, details that tugged at her like loose threads. Turning to the windows, she approached one of the tall, narrow panes, its latch slightly ajar to allow a breath of air. The sill was high, requiring a ladder or considerable agility to reach, but Miss Marple's keen eyes spotted a faint smudge of dirt, barely visible against the polished wood. She ran a finger along it, her lips pursing thoughtfully. "Interesting," she said, glancing at Sir Henry. "This window, was it open yesterday evening?" Sir Henry frowned, uncertain. "Grayson usually leaves one or two ajar for ventilation, especially in autumn. The library can get musty otherwise, but surely no one could climb through. Those windows are nearly 10 feet off the ground outside." Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring the image of young Tommy Pierce, who had once scaled the vicarage wall to steal apples, using nothing but a trellis and determination. "Height is no barrier to someone determined," she said, "but the smudge here suggests someone may have leaned or stepped on the sill. It's faint, but it's there." She filed the detail away, her thoughts turning to Lady Clara's midnight stroll and the parcel Tommy claimed to have seen. She returned to the case, circling it slowly, her eyes scanning the floor. The dust, undisturbed except for Grayson's concentrated footprints near the case, offered no further clues, but Miss Marple paused by a small table nearby, where Dr. Hart had worked. A faint ring from a teacup marked the wood, and a single pencil shaving curled beside it, as if left in haste. "Doctor? Hart was here yesterday," she said, more to herself than to Sir Henry. "Her table faces the case directly. She would have seen anyone approaching it." Sir Henry nodded, his expression brightening. "Yes, she was here most of the day. She'd have noticed anything odd, wouldn't she?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone non-committal. "But people see what they expect to see, Sir Henry. I once knew a shopkeeper in St. Mary Mead who failed to notice a thief because he was too busy counting his stock. Dr. Hart's focus on her work might have blinded her to other things." She paused, her eyes lingering on the case. Or perhaps she saw exactly what she needed to. Sir Henry looked puzzled, but Miss Marple offered no further explanation, only a gentle smile. "I'd like to examine the room once more tomorrow, in the morning light," she said. "Details can look different with a fresh perspective. And perhaps we might ask Mr. Grayson to confirm the window's state last night. Small things, you know, can lead to great revelations." As they left the library, Sir Henry glanced back at the empty case, his shoulders sagging. "It's like a ghost, that book," he said, "gone without a trace." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she retrieved her knitting bag. "Ghosts leave traces, Sir Henry," she said. "It's only a matter of finding them. The case, the key, the window, they're all telling us something, if we listen." Her mind was already sifting through the day's conversations, Grayson's nervous hands, Lady Clara's evasive charm, Drake's ambitious gleam, and Dr. Hart's guarded sketches. Each was a piece of the conundrum, and the locked case, she felt, was its heart. As they returned to the morning room, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village gossip, Mrs. Pemberley's tale of Drake's late-night meeting, and Tommy's sighting of Lady Clara. The Historia Naturalis was a prize that drew out hidden desires, and the locked case, far from being a barrier, was a challenge that someone had met with cunning. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, and she knew the next thread, perhaps a whisper from the village or a slip from one of the suspects, would bring her closer to the truth. Chapter 7. A Village Whisper. The evening had settled over St. Mary Mead with a gentle hush, the kind that draped the village in a quiet intimacy, broken only by the distant bark of a dog or the soft chime of the church clock striking 7. Miss Jane Marple sat in the cozy tea-room of Mrs. Pemberley's shop, a quaint establishment nestled between the post office and the butcher's, its windows adorned with lace curtains and its tables set with mismatched china. The air was thick with the scent of scones and brewing tea, and the low hum of village gossip provided a familiar backdrop to Miss Marple's thoughts. She had slipped away from Ashford Hall after her examination of the library, seeking the pulse of the village, where whispers often held more truth than polished statements. Her knitting bag rested beside her, the faint click of needles a soothing counterpoint to the chatter around her. Mrs. Pemberley, a stout woman with a keen eye for detail and an even keener tongue for news, bustled over with a fresh pot of tea. "Miss Marple, it's a rare treat to see you here," she said, her voice warm but laced with curiosity. "They're saying up at the hall that Sir Henry's lost a book, a proper treasure by all accounts. Is it true you're looking into it?" Her eyes gleamed, and Miss Marple smiled, recognizing the postmistress's knack for ferreting out stories. "Indeed, Mrs. Pemberley," Miss Marple replied, her tone as mild as the steam rising from her cup. "A rare book has gone missing, and I'm doing my best to help Sir Henry. But you know how these things are. Sometimes the smallest tidbit can shed light. Have you heard anything in the village about the hall or its guests?" She sipped her tea, her eyes bright with expectation, knowing that Mrs. Pemberley's shop was the crossroads of St. Mary Mead's secrets. Mrs. Pemberley leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, now, there's been talk, hasn't there? That book dealer, Mr. Drake, was seen at the Green Man last night, near closing time. He was with a stranger, a shifty-looking fellow, all bundled up in a coat, though it wasn't that cold. They were talking low, but I heard from Jenny, the barmaid, that they mentioned a valuable item and a buyer waiting. Sounded like business, but not the honest kind, if you ask me. She straightened, adjusting her apron with a knowing nod. Miss Marple's fingers paused on her teacup, her mind filing away the detail. "How interesting," she said, her voice soft but her thoughts racing. "And this stranger, did Jenny describe him further?" Mrs. Pemberley shook her head. Not much to go on. Dark hair, she thought, and a city accent. London, maybe. He left in a hurry, and Mr. Drake stayed on, looking pleased with himself. Jenny said he paid for his drinks with a crisp new note, which struck her as odd, seeing as he'd been grumbling about the cost of ale the day before. She paused, then added, "Mind you, that's not all. Young Tommy, the baker's lad, has been spinning a tale about Lady Clara." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained serene. "Tommy, you say? He's a sharp boy, isn't he? Always noticing things. What did he see?" Mrs. Pemberley glanced around, ensuring no other patrons were listening, then leaned in again. "He swears he saw Lady Clara near the hall's gates, well past midnight last night. Said she was carrying something bulky, wrapped in cloth, and looking all furtive-like. Now, Tommy's prone to exaggeration, but he was adamant. Said she slipped into the shadows when she saw him coming with the morning loaves." She raised an eyebrow, clearly relishing the tale. Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring the image of Lady Clara's elegant figure, her emerald dress replaced by a dark cloak, clutching a parcel under the moonlight. "Midnight is a curious hour for a stroll," she murmured, "and Tommy's eyes are keen, even if his stories grow in the telling. I recall when he spotted old Mr. Giles sneaking apples from the vicarage orchard, quite the little observer." She sipped her tea, her thoughts weaving the gossip into the pattern of the day's clues. Grayson's nervous ink stains, Lady Clara's evasive charm, Drake's ambitious gleam, and Dr. Hart's guarded sketches. Mrs. Pemberley, sensing more to uncover, pressed on. "There's more, if you're interested. Mrs. Lane, who cleans at the hall, says that scholar, Dr. Hart, was burning papers in her room's fireplace this morning. Odd, isn't it, for someone so particular about her notes? And Mr. Grayson, bless him, was seen pacing in his cottage garden late last night, muttering to himself. Mrs. Lane reckons he's worried sick about that book." She paused, then added with a sly smile, "You'll get to the bottom of it, Miss Marple. You always do." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her mind was a whirl of connections. "You're most kind, Mrs. Pemberley," she said. "The village always has a way of seeing things, doesn't it? Like a mirror held up to the truth, even if it's a bit distorted." She set her teacup down, her fingers brushing her knitting bag as if to anchor her thoughts. "I may need to speak with Tommy myself, and perhaps Jenny at the Green Man. Their stories could be most illuminating." As Mrs. Pemberley bustled off to tend to another customer, Miss Marple leaned back, her eyes drifting to the window, where the village street lay quiet under the fading light. The whispers of St. Mary Mead were like the threads of her knitting, tangled at first, but capable of forming a clear pattern with patience. Drake's meeting at the inn, Lady Clara's midnight errand, Dr. Hart's burned papers, and Grayson's late-night pacing, each was a fragment, hinting at motives hidden beneath polished surfaces. She rose, leaving a few coins for the tea, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The walk back to Ashford Hall was short, but Miss Marple took her time, her mind sifting through the village's tales. She thought of a similar case in St. Mary Mead, when gossip about a stranger at the Blue Boar had led her to a stolen brooch hidden in a traveler's bag. Whispers, she knew, were not proof, but they were signposts, pointing to where the truth might lie. At the hall, Sir Henry greeted her in the drawing-room, his face eager for news. "Any progress, Miss Marple?" he asked, offering her a chair by the fire. "The police are coming tomorrow, but I'd rather you found the book before they turn the place upside down." Miss Marple settled into the chair, her knitting bag at her side. "The village has been most talkative, Sir Henry," she said, her voice soft but her eyes sharp. "There are stories about Mr. Drake and Lady Clara, and even a hint about Dr. Hart. Nothing certain, mind you, but enough to make one think. I'd like to see the library again in the morning, and perhaps have a word with young Tommy, the baker's boy. Boys like him see things others miss." Sir Henry frowned, puzzled. "The village? Surely the answer's here, in the hall. Those people, Grayson, Lady Clara, Drake, Dr. Hart, they were the only ones near the library." Miss Marple's needles clicked as she began to knit, the rhythm steadying her thoughts. "Oh, the answer is here, Sir Henry, but the village reflects it, like a pond catching the sky. I once solved a theft in St. Mary Mead because a milkman saw a stranger at dawn. Small things, you see, can lead to great discoveries." She paused, her eyes distant. "Tomorrow, I think, we should look at that window again, and perhaps ask Mr. Grayson about his evening habits. The truth is close, Sir Henry. I can feel it." As Sir Henry nodded, his expression a mix of hope and skepticism, Miss Marple's mind turned to the village whispers, each a clue in the puzzle of the Historia Naturalis. The locked case, the smudged sill, the suspect's guarded words, they were all part of a larger design, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was determined to trace its outline. Chapter 8. The Dealer's Past. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Ashford Hall, softening the outlines of the ancient elms and lending an air of quiet mystery to the estate. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting bag at her side, the faint click of her needles a steady counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock. The events of the previous day, the interviews with the suspects, the examination of the locked case, and the village whispers, had woven a complex tapestry in her mind, each thread suggesting a motive, a moment, or a misstep. Now, as she prepared to delve deeper into Mr. Percival Drake's background, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of nearing a truth, much like when she had unraveled the theft of Mrs. Bantry's sapphire ring by tracing a single overheard conversation in St. Mary Mead. Sir Henry Ashford entered, his face drawn but hopeful, carrying a tray of tea and biscuits. "Miss Marple, I trust you slept well?" he asked, setting the tray on the table. "The police will be here this afternoon, but I'm counting on you to make sense of this before they start poking about. Have you any new thoughts?" His voice held a note of urgency, and Miss Marple noted the way. His hands fidgeted with the teapot, betraying his lingering unease. "I've had a few thoughts, Sir Henry," she replied, her tone as gentle as the morning light filtering through the curtains. "The village has been most illuminating, and I believe we must look closer at Mr. Drake. His interest in the Historia Naturalis was, shall we say, pronounced, and there are hints of troubles in his past that may bear on this matter." She paused, her eyes twinkling with quiet determination. "I've asked my nephew, Inspector Raymond West, to make some discreet inquiries in London. He's quite adept at uncovering what people prefer to keep hidden." Sir Henry's brow furrowed. Drake's past? He's a reputable dealer, isn't he? Though I'll admit, his manner is a bit too smooth for my liking. He poured the tea, his movements careful but distracted. What sort of troubles do you suspect? Miss Marple accepted a cup, her fingers brushing the delicate china. Oh, nothing certain yet, she said, her voice soft but laced with intent. But men like Mr. Drake, with their polished exteriors, often have shadows trailing behind them. I recall a jeweler in St. Mary Mead, Mr. Thompson, who seemed the soul of propriety until his debts led him to pawn a customer's brooch. Ambition and desperation, Sir Henry, are close cousins. She sipped her tea, her mind already turning to the task ahead. The door opened, and a maid announced that Inspector Raymond West had telephoned from London with information. Sir Henry excused himself to take the call in his study, leaving Miss Marple to her thoughts. She set her cup down, her eyes drifting to the window, where the mist was beginning to lift, revealing the sharp edges of the garden hedges. Drake's confident demeanor, his quick deflection of questions about his finances, and Mrs. Pemberley's tale of his late-night meeting at the Green Man all pointed to a man under pressure. The Historia Naturalis, with its promise of a fortune, would be a powerful lure for someone in need. Sir Henry returned, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Your nephew's been busy, Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chair. "He says Drake's had some difficulties in London, debts, mostly, from a failed venture in rare manuscripts. There was even a scandal a few years back, something about a stolen incunabulum sold to a private collector. Drake was never charged, but the suspicion stuck. And Raymond says there's talk of a buyer in Paris, a wealthy eccentric who's been asking about early printed books, including one matching the Historia's description." He shook his head, as if struggling to reconcile the information with the man he'd invited to his home. Miss Marple's needles resumed their quiet rhythm, the click a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. "How very interesting," she said, her voice calm but her mind racing. "A buyer in Paris, you say? That aligns with what Mr. Drake let slip yesterday. And debts, of course, can make a man bold or reckless. I think we should have another word with him, Sir Henry, to see if he might share more about this buyer or his own circumstances." Sir Henry nodded, summoning a servant to fetch Drake. As they waited, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the library, the locked case, and the faint smudge on the windowsill. Drake's knowledge of the book's value, his access to the library, and his financial straits formed a compelling thread, but she knew better than to settle on one suspect too soon. The village whispers, Lady Clara's midnight parcel, Dr. Hart's burned papers, Grayson's late-night pacing, suggested other motives, other secrets. The truth, she felt, was like a skein of wool, tangled but traceable with care. Mr. Drake entered, his suit as impeccable as ever, though Miss Marple noted a slight tightness around his eyes, as if he hadn't slept well. His smile was polished, but it lacked the ease of their previous meeting. "Miss Marple, Sir Henry," he said, inclining his head. "I hope there's progress on the book. It's a terrible loss." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught a faint strain, like a note played slightly off-key. "Some progress, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle, but her gaze sharp. "Please, Mr. Drake, sit down. We've been hearing interesting things about your work in London, and I thought you might clarify a few points for us." She paused, letting the words settle, watching his reaction. Drake's smile stiffened, and he sat, crossing his legs with deliberate ease. "My work. I'm happy to discuss it, but I'm not sure what it has to do with the theft. I'm a dealer, Miss Marple. My business is books, not burglary." His tone was light, but his fingers drummed briefly on the arm of the chair, a gesture Miss Marple noted with interest. "Of course," she said, her smile serene. "But you mentioned a buyer in Paris yesterday, someone interested in a book like the Historia Naturalis. Could you tell us more about that? It might help us understand who else might have known about the book's value." Drake's eyes flickered, and he adjusted his tie, a small movement that betrayed his unease. "Just a passing comment," he said. "I have clients all over Europe, collectors, you know, always on the lookout for rare finds. One of them, a gentleman in Paris, mentioned he'd pay well for a first edition Pliny, but I never told him about Sir Henry's copy specifically. It's just the sort of thing dealers talk about." He spread his hands as if to dismiss the matter, but Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the slight flush creeping up his neck. "And your business, Mr. Drake," she continued, her voice as soft as a breeze. "It's been thriving, I trust? No troubles that might, say, tempt a man to take a shortcut?" She leaned forward slightly, her expression kindly, but her question pointed, like a needle slipping through fabric. Drake's jaw tightened, and for a moment his polished facade cracked, revealing a flash of irritation. "My business is fine, Miss Marple," he said, his voice sharper than before. "I've had setbacks, like anyone in trade, but I'm no thief. That scandal in London was nonsense, jealous competitors stirring up trouble. I was cleared of any wrongdoing." He leaned back, forcing a smile. "You're barking up the wrong tree, I'm afraid." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "I see," she said. "And last night after dinner, where were you? I understand you were seen at the Green Man, speaking with a stranger about a valuable item." Drake's smile vanished, replaced by a wary glint. "The Green Man?" "Yes, I had a drink there, catching up with an old acquaintance from London. We talked business, nothing to do with the Historia. Just a coincidence, Miss Marple. You know how village gossip twists things." His voice was steady, but his hands clenched briefly, and Miss Marple filed away the reaction, recalling Mrs. Pemberley's account of the shifty stranger and the crisp new note. She tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Coincidences are curious things, Mr. Drake," she said. "I once knew a grocer in St. Mary Mead who claimed a coincidence when his till was short, but it turned out he'd been slipping coins to a bookmaker. Small things, you see, can point to larger truths." She paused, letting the silence linger, watching Drake's discomfort grow. Sir Henry, who had been listening quietly, interjected. "Miss Marple, surely you don't think Drake would risk his career for this? He's got too much to lose." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she resumed her knitting. "Perhaps," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But loss, Sir Henry, can drive a man to desperate measures. I'd like to know more about this acquaintance of Mr. Drake's, and perhaps Inspector West can help. For now, thank you, Mr. Drake. You've been most helpful." Her smile was kind, but her eyes held a quiet intensity, as if she were already tracing the next thread in the mystery. Drake rose, his movements stiff, and left the room with a curt nod. Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his expression troubled. "He's rattled, isn't he? Do you think he's hiding something?" Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up, her eyes distant. "Oh, he's hiding something, Sir Henry," she said. Whether it's the book or merely his pride, we shall see. I think it's time we spoke with young Tommy, the baker's boy, and perhaps Jenny at the Green Man. The village, you know, has a way of seeing what the hall conceals. She resumed her knitting, the steady rhythm a mirror to her thoughts, as she prepared to unravel the next layer of the Historia Naturalis's disappearance. Chapter 9. The Nighttime Clue. The morning mist had burned away, leaving Ashford Hall bathed in the crisp clarity of an autumn day. Miss Jane Marple stood once more in the library, her small figure framed by the towering shelves that seemed to whisper secrets in the quiet air. The empty glass case, still the silent heart of the mystery, gleamed under the chandelier's soft light, its unblemished lock a taunting puzzle. After her conversation with Mr. Drake and the troubling revelations from Inspector West, Miss Marple felt the threads of the Historia Naturalis theft drawing tighter, yet the pattern remained elusive. The village whispers, Drake's shady meeting, Lady Clara's midnight parcel, Dr. Hart's burned papers, and Grayson's nervous pacing had added texture to the mystery. But it was the library itself, she sensed, that held the key to unraveling it. Sir Henry Ashford stood nearby, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mix of impatience and trust in Miss Marple's quiet competence. "The police will be here in a few hours," he said, glancing at the case. "I hope we can give them something to work with, Miss Marple. This room, it's like a riddle that won't solve itself." His voice carried a note of exasperation, and Miss Marple noted the way. His eyes lingered on the empty velvet lining, as if willing the book to reappear. "Riddles have answers, Sir Henry," she replied, her tone as gentle as the rustle of her shawl. "And rooms, you know, have memories. I recall a case in St. Mary Mead, when a missing locket was found because of a scuff mark on a parlor floor. Small things, overlooked, often speak the loudest." She stepped closer to the case, her eyes scanning its brass fittings with the precision of a jeweler examining a gem. This time, she had asked to visit the library at dusk, when the light would mimic the conditions of the previous evening, the time of the theft. The high windows, one still slightly ajar, cast long shadows across the oak-paneled walls, and Miss Marple moved toward them, her steps deliberate. The faint smudge of dirt on the sill, noted yesterday, was clearer now in the slanting light, a subtle mark, no wider than a thumb, suggesting a shoe or a hand. She leaned closer, her fingers hovering over the wood, and noticed something new. A tiny splinter, barely visible, caught in the grain of the sill. Attached to it was a thread of silk, fine and pale, almost invisible against the wood's dark polish. "Curious," she murmured, carefully plucking the thread and holding it to the light. It shimmered faintly, a delicate shade of cream, and Miss Marple's mind flashed to Lady Clara's evening gown from the night of the theft, a creamy silk confection that had rustled as she moved. "Very curious indeed," she said, tucking the thread into a small envelope from her knitting bag. She turned to Sir Henry. "This window, Sir Henry, do you recall if it was open last night, when Mr. Grayson locked up?" Sir Henry frowned, rubbing his chin. "Grayson mentioned leaving it ajar for air, as he often does, but it's so high, surely no one could climb through without a ladder, and we'd have noticed one left outside." He gestured to the window, its base nearly 10 feet from the ground below, accessible only by the steep drop of the hall's outer wall. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the garden visible through the glass, where a trellis of climbing roses hugged the stonework. "Height is no barrier to determination," she said softly. "I once knew a lad in St. Mary Mead who scaled a church tower to retrieve a kite, using nothing but ivy and bravado. But this thread, silk, I think, suggests someone was here, perhaps leaning out or in." She paused, her mind turning to Tommy's tale of Lady Clara's midnight stroll, the bulky parcel in her arms. She moved back to the case, circling it slowly, her eyes scanning the floor for further clues. The dust, disturbed only by Grayson's. Footprints offered little new, but she noticed a faint scuff near the base of the case, as if someone had stood there longer than necessary. She knelt, her movements surprisingly spry for her age, and examined the mark. It was subtle, but the angle suggested someone facing the case directly, perhaps studying the lock. "This mark," she said, glancing at Sir Henry. "Could it be from Mr. Grayson's nightly checks?" Sir Henry shook his head. "He's meticulous, but he doesn't linger by the case. He checks the lock and moves on. That mark could be from anyone, I suppose. Doctor, Hart, Drake, even Lady Clara." His voice faltered, as if reluctant to cast suspicion on his guest. Miss Marple rose, brushing her hands together. "Anyone, indeed," she said, her tone thoughtful. "But it's the timing that interests me. The book was here when Grayson locked up at 8, yet gone by morning. Someone, Sir Henry, was in this room after hours." She glanced at the ladder propped against a shelf, its base slightly askew, as if recently moved. "And this ladder, does it stay in place, or is it moved about?" Sir Henry followed her gaze. "It's usually there, for reaching the higher shelves. Grayson uses it, and Dr. Hart might have, for her research. I don't think it's been moved, but I can't say for certain." He looked at her, his expression hopeful. "Do you think it's significant?" "Everything is significant until it isn't," Miss Marple replied, her smile faint but her eyes sharp. She approached the ladder, running a finger along its edge, and found another faint mark, a smear of wax, as if from a candle or a polished shoe. "Someone has been climbing," she murmured, her mind conjuring an image of a figure in the darkened library, moving with purpose. She thought of Doctor Hart's intense focus, Drake's ambitious gleam, and Lady Clara's silk gown, each a potential match for the clues before her. She turned to the desk where Grayson kept his key, its locked drawer still unblemished. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Grayson again," she said, "to confirm his movements last night, and perhaps we might ask Lady Clara about her gown. Silk can catch on things, you know, and leave traces." She held up the envelope with the thread, her expression serene, but her mind racing. Sir Henry nodded, his face a mix of admiration and puzzlement. "You see things, Miss Marple, that others miss. But do you think this thread points to Lady Clara? She's so refined. Surely she wouldn't climb a window." Miss Marple's needles clicked as she retrieved her knitting bag, the rhythm steadying her thoughts. "Refinement, Sir Henry, is no proof of innocence," she said. "I once knew a lady in St. Mary Mead, ever so elegant, who slipped a silver spoon into her reticule at a tea party. It's not the gown, but the heart beneath it, that matters." She paused, her eyes distant. "I think we should also ask Dr. Hart about her work at that table, and perhaps Mr. Drake about his evening at the Green Man. The night, you see, holds many secrets." As they left the library, the dusk deepening outside, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the silk thread, the scuff mark, and the ladder's subtle shift. The Historia Naturalis had vanished under cover of darkness, and the nighttime clues, each small, each telling, were pointing her closer to the truth. The village whispers and the suspect's guarded words were like stitches in a pattern, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to sew them together before the police arrived. Chapter 10. The Scholar's Slip. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Ashford Hall's morning room, painting golden stripes across the polished floor. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual chair, her knitting bag at her side, the soft click of her needles a steady rhythm against the quiet hum of the house. The clues gathered thus far, the silk thread on the windowsill, the scuff mark by the case, the village whispers of Drake's shady meeting and Lady Clara's midnight parcel, had tightened the web of the Historia Naturalis mystery, but the final knot eluded her. Dr. Evelyn Hart, the reserved scholar, was the next thread to examine, and Miss Marple sensed that her guarded demeanor and meticulous notebook held secrets that might unravel the puzzle. Sir Henry Ashford stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mix of hope and impatience. "The police will be here by noon, Miss Marple," he said, glancing at the clock. "I trust you're close to an answer. Dr. Hart seems the least likely culprit, don't you think? All that scholarly zeal. She lives for her books, not for stealing them." His tone was reassuring, but Miss Marple noted the slight crease in his brow, as if he were trying to convince himself. "Zeal can be a curious thing, Sir Henry," she replied, her voice as gentle as the morning light. "I once knew a schoolmaster in St. Mary Mead, a most learned man, who took a rare map from the village archive to protect it. He meant no harm, but his passion led him astray. Dr. Hart's devotion to her work is clear, but devotion, you see, can mask other motives." She set her knitting aside, her eyes bright with anticipation. The door opened, and Dr. Evelyn Hart entered, her gray dress as severe as ever, her leather notebook clutched tightly in her hands. Her spectacles gleamed in the sunlight, and her expression was one of guarded composure, though Miss Marple caught a faint tightening of her lips, as if she sensed the weight of the moment. "Miss Marple, Sir Henry," she said, her voice low and precise. "I hope I can assist you further. This theft is a tragedy for scholarship." She sat, her posture rigid, her notebook resting on her lap like a talisman. Miss Marple smiled, her demeanor warm but her gaze sharp, like a needle poised to thread a difficult seam. "Indeed, Dr. Hart, it's a great loss," she said. "Your work in the library has given you a unique view of the Historia Naturalis. I'd like to hear more about your time there yesterday, and perhaps about that remarkable notebook of yours." She nodded toward the bulging leather volume, her tone encouraging, but with a subtle edge. Dr. Hart's fingers tightened on the notebook, and she adjusted her spectacles, a gesture Miss Marple had come to recognize as a sign of unease. "My notebook," she said, her voice steady but with a faint tremor. "It's just my research, sketches, transcriptions, notes on medieval texts. I've been studying the Historia for my paper, as I told you. There's nothing unusual about it." She opened the book, revealing pages filled with dense handwriting and intricate drawings, including the detailed sketch of the Historia Naturalis's title page that Miss Marple had noted before. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes lingering on the sketch. "How beautifully done," she said, her voice admiring. "Such precision must require close study. You mentioned Sir Henry allowed you to examine the book last week, but I wonder, did you need to see it again yesterday? Perhaps after Mr. Grayson locked the case. Dr. Hart's eyes flickered, and she closed the notebook with a snap. No, I didn't, she said quickly. I worked from my earlier notes, as I told you. I was at my table by the window, transcribing from an herbal. The Historia was in its case when I left at 8, when Mr. Grayson locked up. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Her words were firm, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward the window, as if the mention of it stirred a memory. Very interesting, Miss Marple said, her tone unchanged but her mind alert. Your table faces the case directly, doesn't it? You'd have noticed anyone approaching it, I imagine. She paused, watching Dr. Hart's reaction, recalling the faint pencil shaving and teacup ring on the table, signs of a scholar immersed in her work, or perhaps distracted by something else. Dr. Hart nodded, her fingers brushing the notebook's edge. Yes, I suppose so, but I was focused on my work. Mr. Grayson was there most of the time, checking his records. Mr. Drake came in the morning, and Lady Clara breezed through in the afternoon, but neither went near the case. I didn't see anything suspicious. Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted a slight flush in her cheeks, a hint of discomfort that belied her calm. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. And after you left the library, what did you do? I understand you returned to your room. Did you continue your work there, or perhaps dispose of any papers? She let the question hang, her eyes fixed on Dr. Hart, recalling Mrs. Pemberley's gossip about burned papers in the scholar's fireplace. Dr. Hart's composure faltered, and her hand stilled on the notebook. Dispose of papers? She repeated, her voice rising slightly. I don't know what you mean. I organized my notes in my room, as I always do. I burned some old drafts, nothing unusual for a scholar. Research is messy, Miss Marple. Her tone was defensive, and Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the way her fingers clutched the notebook, as if shielding it from scrutiny. Of course, Miss Marple said, her smile serene. Scholars do have their habits, but I wonder, your sketch of the Historia's binding was so detailed. Did you make others like it, perhaps of the book's pages or clasps? She leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing, like a breeze stirring hidden leaves. Dr. Hart hesitated, her spectacles glinting as she adjusted them. I made a few sketches, yes, she admitted. The binding, the marginalia, they're important for my study of medieval bookmaking. But I did that when Sir Henry allowed me access. I had no need to touch the book yesterday. She opened the notebook again, flipping to a page with a drawing of the Historia's clasp, its intricate metalwork rendered with almost obsessive precision. This is all for my paper, she said, her voice firm but with a hint of strain. Miss Marple studied the sketch, her mind racing. The detail was extraordinary, suggesting not just academic interest, but an intimate familiarity with the book. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead artist, Miss Eliza, who had once copied a stolen painting so perfectly it was mistaken for the original. Remarkable work, Miss Marple said, her tone admiring. It almost seems as if you could recreate the book itself. Such skill could be tempting in certain circumstances. Dr. Hart's eyes widened, and she snapped the notebook shut again. Recreate it? She said, her voice sharp. I'm a scholar, not a forger. My work is about understanding history, not stealing it. Her words were vehement, but Miss Marple noted the flush deepening in her cheeks, the slight tremble in her hands. Sir Henry, who had been listening quietly, interjected, "Miss Marple, surely you don't suspect Dr. Hart of forgery? Her reputation is impeccable, and she's been nothing but diligent." His tone was protective, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of doubt in his eyes, as if her questions had stirred unease. "I suspect nothing yet, Sir Henry," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "I merely ask questions, as is my habit. Dr. Hart's passion is clear, but passion, you know, can lead to curious choices. I once knew a vicar in St. Mary Mead who borrowed a rare prayer book to study its verses, only to keep it longer than he should." She smiled at Dr. Hart, her eyes kind but unyielding. "Thank you, Dr. Hart. You've been most helpful. I may need to see that notebook again, if you don't mind." Dr. Hart rose, her posture stiff, and nodded curtly before leaving the room. Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his expression troubled. "She's rattled, isn't she? But those sketches, they're just her work, surely." Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles resuming their quiet rhythm. "Surely," she said, her voice thoughtful. "But sketches, Sir Henry, can serve many purposes. I think we should look at her room, with her permission, to see what those burned papers might tell us. And perhaps another visit to the library to check that table again. The truth, you know, is often in the smallest details." Her eyes were distant, her mind weaving the silk thread, the scuff mark, and Dr. Hart's sketches into a pattern that was beginning to take shape. Chapter 11. The Confrontation. The late morning sun poured into Ashford Hall's drawing room, its golden light illuminating the intricate patterns of the Persian rug and casting a warm glow on the faces of those gathered. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting bag at her side, though her needles lay still, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Her pale blue eyes, sharp as ever, surveyed the room with quiet intensity, taking in the 4 figures seated before her. Mr. Grayson, the librarian, his spectacles glinting nervously. Lady Clara Wentworth, her auburn hair catching the light as she maintained an air of poised nonchalance. Mr. Percival Drake, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the unease in his posture. And Dr. Evelyn Hart, clutching her notebook, her face a mask of guarded composure. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the room itself sensed the unraveling of the mystery of the missing Historia Naturalis. Sir Henry Ashford stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression a blend of hope and apprehension. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "The police will arrive within the hour. You've spoken with everyone, examined the library, and heard the village talk. Have you an answer for us? Who took my book?" His eyes searched hers, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his hands, a sign of the strain the theft had placed on him. She smiled, her demeanor as serene as a summer afternoon in St. Mary Mead, but her mind was a whirl of connections, each clue a thread in the tapestry she had been weaving. "I believe we are very close, Sir Henry," she said, her voice soft, but carrying a quiet authority. "A missing book, a locked case, and 4 people with access. It's a puzzle, but puzzles, you know, have a way of solving themselves when you look at them properly. I'd like to share my thoughts, and perhaps our friends here can help clarify a few points." Her gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on each suspect, noting their reactions. Grayson's fidgeting fingers, Lady Clara's forced smile, Drake's tense jaw, and Dr. Hart's tightened grip on her notebook. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her hands still folded, her tone conversational but precise. "Let us begin with the library itself," she said. "The Historia Naturalis was in its case when Mr. Grayson locked up at 8 o'clock, yet gone by morning. The case showed no signs of tampering, and only 2 keys exist, one in Sir Henry's study, the other in Mr. Grayson's desk. The windows, high and narrow, were ajar, and a smudge of dirt and a silk thread on the sill suggested someone may have approached from outside. Yet the dust on the floor showed only Mr. Grayson's footprints near the case, and a scuff mark suggested someone lingered there. A ladder, slightly askew, hinted at movement in the room, and a pencil shaving by Dr. Hart's table spoke of her presence. These are the facts, and they tell a story." Grayson shifted uncomfortably, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "I locked the case, Miss Marple," he said, his voice trembling. "I swear it was secure. I'd never let harm come to the collection." His hands twisted together, and Miss Marple noted the ink stains still fresh on his fingers. "I don't doubt your diligence, Mr. Grayson," she said kindly. "But diligence can be a heavy burden. Your footprints by the case were many, as if you stood there longer than a simple check required. And your notebook, such a careful record, yet one entry seemed fresher than the rest, as if added in haste." She paused, watching his flush deepen, but she moved on, her gaze shifting to Lady Clara. "Lady Clara," she continued, "your visit to the library was brief, yet you were seen near the hall's gates at midnight, carrying a bulky parcel. Your gown that evening was silk, and a thread of that same shade was found on the windowsill. A nighttime stroll is charming, but perhaps it was more than a whim." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, catching the slight tightening of Lady Clara's smile. Lady Clara laughed, a melodic sound that rang slightly hollow. "A thread? Oh, Miss Marple, silk catches on everything. I was out walking, yes, but only to clear my head. The parcel was just my sketchbook and some charcoal. I often draw at night. Surely you don't think I'd climb a window for a dusty old book?" Her eyes sparkled with defiance, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers brushed her pearl earring, a nervous gesture. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged, and turned to Dr. Hart. "Dr. Hart, your sketches of the Historia Naturalis were remarkably detailed, suggesting a deep familiarity with the book. You worked at a table facing the case, yet saw nothing unusual. And papers burned in your fireplace this morning raise questions. Scholarship is a noble pursuit, but could it have led you to preserve the book in your own way?" Her voice was soft, but the question hung in the air, and Dr. Hart's face paled, her grip on her notebook tightening. "I burned old drafts, nothing more," Dr. Hart said, her voice sharp. "My sketches are for my research, not for theft. I'd never harm a book like that. It's a treasure." Her eyes blazed with conviction, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of fear, as if her words concealed a deeper truth. Finally, Miss Marple's gaze settled on Mr. Drake, whose polished exterior seemed to fray under her scrutiny. "Mr. Drake," she said, "your interest in the Historia Naturalis was clear, as was your knowledge of its value. Your debts in London, a past scandal, and a meeting at the Green Man with a stranger discussing a valuable item suggest a motive. You had access to the library, and your confidence perhaps made you bold." Her tone was calm, but her words were like a needle-piercing fabric, and Drake's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "That's nonsense," Drake said, his voice tight. "I'm a dealer, not a thief. My meeting was about another deal, nothing to do with the book. You've got no proof, Miss Marple." His hands gripped the arms of his chair, and Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool room. She leaned back, her hands folding again, her expression serene. "Proof is a tricky thing, Mr. Drake," she said. "It's like a pattern in knitting, one stitch out of place, and the whole design falters. But let me suggest a possibility. The book was taken after 8 when the library was locked. A duplicate key, perhaps obtained through cunning, could have opened the case. The silk thread and smudge on the sill might be a distraction, meant to suggest an outside thief. But the scuff mark, the ladder, and the village whispers point to someone inside, someone with motive and opportunity." Her eyes swept the room, lingering on Drake. Someone, perhaps, who knew a buyer was waiting and saw a chance to clear their debts. Drake stood abruptly, his face flushed. "This is absurd. I won't sit here and be accused without evidence. If you've got something solid, say it." His voice rose, and Sir Henry stepped forward, his expression alarmed. "Miss Marple," Sir Henry said, "are you saying Drake took it? Or is it one of the others?" His eyes darted between the suspects, searching for clarity. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her gaze was unyielding. "I'm not accusing yet, Sir Henry," she said, "but the truth is close. I think a search of Mr. Drake's belongings might be wise, and perhaps Dr. Hart's room, to see what those burned papers were. The Historia Naturalis is still near, I feel it." She paused, her eyes locking on Drake's. "And I suspect, Mr. Drake, you know more than you've told us." Drake's face darkened, but he said nothing, sitting back down with a scowl. The room fell silent, the tension palpable, as Miss Marple's words hung like a challenge. The Historia Naturalis was a magnet for hidden desires, and she was determined to uncover whose had pulled it from its case. Chapter 12. The Unveiling. The drawing room of Ashford Hall was thick with expectation, the morning sun, now high, casting sharp shadows across the ornate rug. Miss Jane Marple sat serenely in her chair, her knitting bag untouched, her hands folded with the calm assurance of one who had unraveled many a tangle in St. Mary Mead. The 4 suspects, Mr. Grayson, Lady Clara Wentworth, Mr. Percival Drake, and Dr. Evelyn Hart, sat before her, their faces a gallery of emotions. Grayson's nervous pallor, Lady Clara's strained elegance, Drake's barely concealed defiance, and Dr. Hart's rigid composure. Sir Henry Ashford stood by the fireplace, his eyes fixed on Miss Marple, hope and anxiety warring in his expression as the police's imminent arrival loomed. "Miss Marple," Sir Henry said, his voice taut, "you've laid out the clues, the locked case, the silk thread, the village gossip. Please, tell us, have you found the thief?" His hands clasped tightly, as if bracing for the answer, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Miss Marple's pale blue eyes swept the gathering, her smile gentle, but her gaze as piercing as a needle through fine cloth. "The Historia Naturalis is a treasure," she began, her voice soft yet commanding attention. "And treasures, you know, draw out the deepest desires. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a simple brooch spark envy enough to break a friendship. Here, we have a book worth a fortune, a locked case, and 4 people with access. Let us piece it together, step by step, and see where the truth lies." She leaned forward, her hands still folded, her tone measured. "The case was locked at 8, as Mr. Grayson assures us, with his key in the desk and Sir Henry's in his study. No signs of force, yet the book was gone by morning. The windows, high and ajar, bore a smudge and a silk thread, suggesting an outside approach, but the dust on the floor showed only Mr. Grayson's footprints near the case, with a scuff mark hinting at lingering. A ladder, slightly askew, spoke of movement, and a pencil shaving marked Dr. Hart's table. The village, meanwhile, whispered of Lady Clara's midnight parcel, Mr. Drake's shady meeting, Dr. Hart's burned papers, and Mr. Grayson's late-night pacing. Grayson shifted, his spectacles glinting. "I locked the case, Miss Marple," he said, his voice quivering. "I'd stake my life on it." Lady Clara's smile faltered, her fingers brushing her earring, while Dr. Hart clutched her notebook, her face pale. Drake's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, but he remained silent. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Let us consider each of you," she continued. "Mr. Grayson, your devotion to the library is clear, but your nervous manner and that fresh entry in your notebook suggest worry, perhaps fear of blame for a lapse. Yet I see no motive for theft in you, only anxiety." Grayson exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief, though his eyes remained wary. "Lady Clara," she said, turning to the elegant guest, "your charm is undeniable, but your midnight stroll and that silk thread matching your gown are curious. Were you merely sketching as you claim, or was that parcel something more? I think, however, that your role was incidental, a distraction, perhaps." Lady Clara's eyes widened, her smile flickering, but she said nothing, her poise barely holding. "Dr. Hart," Miss Marple continued, her gaze settling on the scholar, "your sketches of the Historia were meticulous, almost too perfect, and those burned papers raise questions. Could you have sought to replicate the book, as scholars sometimes do, for study? But your passion seems academic, not criminal, and I believe your fire destroyed only drafts, not evidence." Dr. Hart's grip on her notebook loosened slightly, though her face remained tense. Finally, Miss Marple's eyes fixed on Mr. Drake, whose polished exterior seemed to fray under her scrutiny. "Mr. Drake," she said, her voice soft but unyielding, "your debts, your past scandal, and your meeting at the Green Man with a stranger discussing a valuable item point to a man in need. You knew the Historia's worth, had access to the library, and spoke of a buyer in Paris. The silk thread and window smudge, I believe, were a clever ruse to suggest an outside thief, but the truth lies closer." Drake stood, his face flushed. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "You've no proof, just village gossip and conjecture. I'm no thief." His voice rang with indignation, but Miss Marple noted the sweat on his brow, the slight tremor in his hands. She raised a hand, her gesture calming but firm. "Proof, Mr. Drake, is in the pattern," she said. "The case was opened with a duplicate key, not Grayson's, not Sir Henry's, but one you obtained through your contacts in London, perhaps from a less than honest locksmith. You entered the library after hours, using the ladder to reach the case, and took the book, planting the silk thread, stolen from Lady Clara's scarf, to mislead us. The scuff mark was yours, from lingering as you worked the lock. You hid the book in your luggage, intending to sell it to your Paris buyer." The room fell silent, the accusation hanging like a storm cloud. Sir Henry's eyes widened, and he turned to Drake. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Grayson gasped. Lady Clara's hand froze on her earring, and Dr. Hart stared, her notebook forgotten. Drake's defiance crumbled, his shoulders slumping as he sank back into his chair. "All right," he muttered, his voice low. "I took it. The debts. They were crushing me. The buyer offered enough to clear everything. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, just needed a way out." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "The book's in my room, in a hidden compartment in my suitcase. I was going to leave tomorrow." Sir Henry rushed from the room, returning minutes later with the Historia Naturalis, its vellum cover gleaming. "It's here!" he exclaimed, relief flooding his face. "Miss Marple, you've done it." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "It was the threads, Sir Henry," she said. "The silk, the scuff, the whispers, they all pointed to Mr. Drake's desperation. I once knew a tailor in St. Mary Mead who hid stolen cloth in his shop, thinking no one would look. People, you see, are much the same." She picked up her knitting, the needles resuming their rhythm, as the room exhaled in collective relief. The police arrived soon after, taking Drake into custody, and Sir Henry clasped Miss Marple's hand, his gratitude effusive. As she prepared to return to St. Mary Mead, her knitting bag swinging gently, Miss Marple felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved, another chapter closed in the endless book of human nature.